Welcome to Alan Skorsky Reports. I'm Alan Skorsky. Since October 7th of 2023, not a day has gone by that Jews around the world, but especially in the United States and Canada, haven't been reminded that what happened in 1930s Germany can happen here. What started out as the most savage attack against the Jewish people since the Holocaust, and what should have been an awakening to the world about Iran and their proxies in Gaza, Lebanon, and Yemen, instead has turned into a we need to understand what provoked all these people in the first place. On college campuses, the streets of Los Angeles, Chicago, and New York, and in Toronto and Montreal, Jews have been attacked both verbally and physically by supporters of Hamas, the very groups who chant death to America. University presidents can't bring themselves to acknowledge what is clearly Palestinianist and Marxist-inspired anti-Semitism, while the Biden administration and many Democrats are incapable of condemning anti-Semitism without including Islamophobia. As a candidate, Donald Trump vowed to deport foreign students who engage in support of Hamas and warned there will be hell to pay if the hostages in Gaza aren't released. How did Biden and the Democrats respond? Well, Chuck Schumer called on Israel to hold new elections. Joe Biden said of the protesters, some of them have a point. And Kamala Harris said, Americans shouldn't see the war in Gaza through a binary lens. Today, I am very honored to have my favorite columnist on all matters Jewish and relating to Israel, Jonathan Tobin, who is the editor-in-chief of the Jewish News Syndicate, a senior contributor to the Federalist and many other publications. He is also the host of the JNS Think Twice podcast and the Jonathan Tobin Daily program, which are both available on all major platforms and YouTube. Jonathan, it is awesome to see you again, and thank you for joining us today.
Well, Alan, it's great to be with you. Thank you.
Well, a lot of the points in my monologue, basically you've written about most of them, and they're all connected one way or another. But I want to start, if you will, with the college campus anti-Semitism, because to me, that's really ground zero of all the anti-Semitism that's taking place today. I went to college in the 80s. You and I are probably close to the same age. And there was always Palestinians-inspired anti-Semitism, but not where it is today. Elise Stefanik established herself on this very subject by challenging university presidents to condemn anti-Semitism, which they couldn't do. Donald Trump, as I wrote, or as I said, wants to deport foreign students who engage in terrorism. And this is something that many college students, including Shabbos Kestenbaum being the primary one, has said that Trump's call to deport these students is merely enforcing the law. But today, and you wrote about this, Occidental College was something you wrote about in one of your columns, that they're basically they've gotten away with just saying, okay, we'll fight anti-Semitism a little bit better. Meanwhile, at Northwestern University in Chicago, they made a deal with the protesters who had all these encampments. In exchange for pulling back their encampments, they will offer scholarships every year to Palestinian students and hire more professors to teach at their distinguished university. With that, Jonathan, let's get started and fire away.
Well, I think you rightly point to what has gone on American college campuses as a key to understanding the surge in anti-Semitism in this country since October 7th, 2023. It is in part, a reaction to the war on Israel and the way that war has been depicted in the media as Israeli aggression, although obviously Israel was attacked. The people who really believe in genocide are the ones who attacked on October 7th. And yet, in classic anti-Semitic, trope, it's the Israelis who are accused of genocide for defending themselves. But to really understand why this has happened, why these points of view have become so mainstream in our culture to the point where both, as you rightly said, both Biden and Harris felt they had to nod to it, could not condemn it unreservedly, and in fact, were attempting to sort of bridge the gap there, was because that was a key element of their Democratic Party base, and that to understand it, you have to understand what has happened in American culture and in American education over the course of the last few decades. The left, the hard, pseudo-Marxist intellectuals who have come up with ideas, these toxic myths of intersectionality, critical race theory, which is an attack on Western civilization, an attack on the United States and the whole ethos of American values and American democracy. But a sidebar to it, and a necessary sidebar from their point of view, is the idea that Israel and Jews are white oppressors. If you divide the world into two perpetually warring groups from which one cannot escape, either the white oppressors or the people of color who are always victims, they classify Jews and Israelis as white oppressors. Now, the Jews have been the most persecuted people in modern history. That doesn't matter according to this ideological framework. And that has become not merely, what might have been a few decades ago considered an eccentric, far left extremist theory. It's now the orthodoxy in American education. It is indoctrinated, not just on the college level, but in K to 12 schools too, as we've seen the work of groups like the Deborah Project and others who have sort of been uncovering this and suing school districts, the teachers' unions about this. But the consequences of it is that we have an entire generation of Americans who have been, educated especially in elite universities, and have been indoctrinated in the idea, not only that America is irredeemably racist, which is not true, but also that Israel's existence as a so-called settler colonial state is illegitimate, that it has no right to exist. And the reason why these debates about Israel in this context are so lacking in substance, and so, really people talking past each other, is that to those who accept this left-wing framework of Israel as an illegitimate settler colonial state, of Israel and the Jews being white oppressors, it doesn't matter what the Palestinians do. October 7th is irrelevant to them. Israel's attempts to make peace over the decades, offers of Palestinian statehood, are irrelevant. All the facts of the conflict are irrelevant. This is best illustrated in the new book by Ta-Nehisi Coates, the literary star bestseller, who wrote this new book, really a profoundly ignorant book, mostly about the Middle East. He has no real understanding of it. He spent 10 days in what he called Palestine, traveling through the Middle East. And in the course of a book that was published a year after October 7th, not once does he mention October 7th. Not once does he mention Hamas or terrorism. It's all irrelevant to him because as far as he's concerned, Israel is, the Jim Crow South, which is insane. That, it's not a racial conflict. So no matter what the Palestinians do, they're still in the right, no matter how many atrocities they commit, no matter how intransigent and opposed to peace they are. It doesn't matter what the Israelis do to try, or don't do, they're still the villains. That's the problem. That's at the core of this sort of woke, and it's connected to the whole diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI, as I like to call it, the woke catechism. And that's the core. I mean, unless you're attacking that, you're not attacking the reason for all this anti-Semitism and the reason for the vituperation, the demonization of Israel. And, the campuses have become sort of ground zero for it because that is where these forces are strongest. And that is where they have created, a situation where anti-Semitism is run amok. And you rightly recall when Elise Stefanik asked the presidents of the University of Pennsylvania, Harvard, and MIT, is advocacy for the genocide of Jews against the rules of your universities? And all of them could only, answer, well, it depends on the context. Now, of course, had she asked, is advocacy for lynching African Americans against the rules of your universities? They would have known, of course, It's against the rules. And anybody who did that would be, thrown off campus, even if they were a tenured professor in the blink of an eye. That's what we're dealing with. So when you get to, as you referenced, Trump's plans, which hopefully he will follow up on, to basically defund universities that enable anti-Semitism and to deport those foreign students who are violating the terms of their visas and doing advocacy for terrorism and conducting anti-Semitic agitation. That's a natural and reasonable response to this crisis. Failing to do that is just appeasing and not recognizing what the real problem is.
Right. So this segues perfectly to what I want to talk about next, because I've said this already for a while, that this is no longer about truth anymore. It's about the Jews and the correct Israel narrative is being overshadowed by the lies. And when there are 15 million Jews in the world, half of whom or more have no connection to Israel, and we're outnumbered by 1.5 billion Muslims, and we'll say that 75% of them believe in the narrative that you just said, we have no way to win this thing. And again, in a column that you wrote, and something I've been talking about also for years, was towards the end of, I guess it was a few weeks ago, when Joe Biden came out of a bookstore with a book by Rashid Khalidi. And your headline was about, false narratives. But that's exactly why we're here, because of the false narrative. Without even arguing history with anybody, you look at very simple. Israel declared independence in 1948. They were attacked by 5 Arab countries. Until 1967, Egypt controlled Gaza. Jordan controlled Judea and Samaria, which they named the West Bank because the West Bank was never an Arab country. And there was never any call for Palestinian statehood. In fact, the 5 countries that attacked Israel never said that we're attacking Israel for Palestinianism. We're attacking them. We want this land for ourselves. And it's progressed. And then it got much worse in 1993 with the Oslo Accords, because before Oslo, there was no Palestinian Authority. There was the PLO. And the PLO was not recognized by any Western nation because they were terrorists. Oslo legitimized and mainstreamed Palestinianism and gave legitimacy to the claim. So here we are now we're in 2024, and this is a whole new generation of people who know nothing about Arafat. They don't know about the Munich Olympics, about Entebbe, about the bus bombings and hijackings. And this false narrative, and again, I remember when I was in college, there was an Arab speaker who said, in 100 years, there won't be an Israel left. Now, I always love these bold predictions about what's going to be in 100 years when no one's here anymore. But basically, this has always been their game plan. They can drag this thing out as long as possible because they've got a lot more numbers than we do, and they can keep playing it out until the world's just tired of the Jews and they just turn on Israel, as we're seeing right now.
Well, you're right. All that history matters, and it's important. If you think this is a territorial dispute, you're wrong, because offers of territory, offers of two-state solutions have always been rejected by the Palestinians because they're not interested in a two-state solution. They're not really that interested, most of them, in a Palestinian state as they are as of destroying the one Jewish state. So all of this history matters. But as we said, just a few minutes ago, to those who think Israel has no right to exist, regardless of where its borders are drawn, or whether there are settlements in Judea and Samaria or not, all the history doesn't matter. It's all entirely irrelevant to the basic formulation that Israel has no right to exist. It must be destroyed. It's a settler colonial state. They do view this as this war has been going on. This war on Zionism has been going on for a century. And I don't doubt that, many Palestinians think it will go on for another century. And who knows, in some form or another, they may be right. But where I think they're wrong, and where I think those who sort of counsel despair on this, in which I have to sort of push back a little where your narrative was heading, is that they're on the wrong side of history, not on the right side of
Correct.
history. That's the notion that Israel, is like the French in Algeria, it's doomed, is wrong. The Jews aren't going anywhere. Israel isn't going anywhere. Israel is, even when it's at its weakest, as it was when it was caught by surprise on October 7th, well, here we are 14, 15 months later. What has happened? Israel has not only largely destroyed Hamas in Gaza, it lingers on as a guerrilla war. They still won't give up. They're like the Black Knight in Monty Python and the Holy Grail. It doesn't matter how many of his limbs you chop off, he's still willing to bite you on the knee.
Right.
It's absurd, but it continues. And yet they've been defeated. They're not closer to their goal of destroying Israel and its genocide. They've gotten a lot of what they consider favorable publicity because they've sacrificed so many of their people, but they're losing, and they know they're losing. Hezbollah, which was considered, really by many Israeli strategists to be like, 10 feet tall and impossible to defeat. Well, Israel has defeated Hezbollah. They were forced to back down on their, whatever happens in southern Lebanon, they were forced to back down on their efforts to aid Hamas by firing into northern Israel. The Syrian regime has fallen as a result of that. Iran has been immeasurably weakened. Israel stood its ground against the bad advice from the Biden administration not to try to finish off Hamas, not to confront Hezbollah, not to confront Iran. And Israel is stronger 15 months later, much stronger, and in a much stronger position. Frankly, so is the United States because of Israel's refusals to take Biden's advice. So, yes, much of Europe is hostile and anti-Semitic. Much of the American left has been captured by the same anti-Semitic, anti-American ideology. But who won the election in the United States? Not the left. If anything, Biden and Harris tried to run away from them in the last weeks of the election, run away from the left. Trump is now president. And just as it was in his first term, where, he sort of classic real estate operator, ways. He basically was telling the Palestinians, "You're like the owner of a property whose value is depreciated. We're offering you less than you would have gotten before, and you'll get even less if you say no." They said no, and so now they're not going to get any state. There will be no push for a two-state solution, which would be insane. So all of this. Israel is not going away. Israel's not going to be defeated. The Jewish people are not going to be defeated. And as dire as the situation can seem on campuses, and as upsetting as it is to see anti-Semitism mainstreamed in the New York Times and the Washington Post and on CNN and MSNBC, and this is a terrible shock to many Americans, especially liberal Jewish Americans who now don't feel quite as at home, with their allies in their political camp. But the vast majority of the American people are with Israel and the Jewish people. Let's never forget that. Not evangelical Christians, certainly most prominently, but most Americans do not buy into it. They never voted for this woke garbage. They don't believe that their country is irredeemably racist. They don't believe in the war, the justification of this war on Israel as a secular colonial state. So we're winning. And indeed, if the Trump administration fulfills its promises, there is an optimistic scenario in which, as I wrote, as my daughter likes to say, sitting here quoting myself, if we have a civil rights division of the Department of Justice that is determined to sue any school that enforces, woke DEI policies for racial discrimination, as they should, DEI is going to roll up like a cheap carpet because nobody's going to want to stand in the way of the federal government in that way. Instead of enforcing racially discriminatory policies, this administration has the potential, has the opportunity to destroy them, to really make an enormous difference. And this is, there's no more fundamental challenge to the future of the United States, never mind Israel, than this civilizational war over woke ideology. It has to be fought. It has to be, sent back to the fever swamps of the left from whence it came. And we're a few weeks away from the start of Trump 2.0. We don't know how it's going to go, but they have the opportunity in that administration with some good appointments. Someone like Harmeet Dillon as the head of the Civil Rights Division of the DOJ. She will have the opportunity to make a real difference, not just on anti-Semitism, although anti-Semitism is the most prominent, most obvious symptom of this woke, toxic myths that have infiltrated all of our culture, not just education, but, the arts, government, business, a real chance, to roll it back. And we should care about this deeply as a Jewish community because anti-Semitism, the Jews have, as they've always been, they're the canaries in the coal mine.
Right.
The overt anti-Semitism we see on college campuses is just the most obvious consequence of allowing the left to complete its long march through our institutions. But they are not invincible. Just as Hezbollah isn't invincible, Iran isn't invincible. Hamas can be defeated. It's not an idea that can't be defeated. Hamas can be defeated. All those things can happen, and the woke left in this country can be defeated as well. And we have to, not take counsel of our fears as much as we should. We should be aware of what the consequences of not taking action are. We have to be confident that with the help of the majority of the American people, those who understand this threat to the Jews as well as to America are going to triumph sooner or later.
Right. Listen, there's no question that this time around, Trump is much, much stronger. Last time he ran because Americans were kind of fed up with Obama and they want to try something new. Now he's coming in with everyone knowing who he is, the failures of the last 4 years, and he's never been stronger. And as you saw, he's got more minority groups than ever before. All those blue cities and blue states moved more to his side. You're seeing in Chicago, the revolt against the Chicago mayor there. So there's no question that under this administration, a lot of good things can happen. You know who's
Yeah,
been
I think that's a really important point in that the 2024 election is potentially, because, it hasn't happened yet. It's a real realignment election in that working class voters have largely abandoned the Democratic Party. The two parties have changed.
right,
The Republicans are not the party solely of Wall Street and big business. The Democrats are the party of Wall Street and big business, in part you can tell by their stands on immigration, because it's corporate America that wants cheap labor, not
yeah.
working class people who know their wages are hurt. The housing shortage is impacted by that. So it really can, we're on the brink of something that will change this country tremendously, and I think potentially for the better. Now, every time, as anyone who studies and covers elections, as I have for a long time, every time anybody wins an election, they always think it's the start of a 1,000-year Reich and they'll never lose
Yeah.
again. In 2000, just to go back the last 20 years, in 2004, George W. Bush won both houses of Congress, won the presidency, won the popular vote. And everybody thought Karl Rove, his polling guru, he had the magic formula to
Right.
win elections. Republicans would never lose again. 4 years later, Barack Obama wins, and an even larger majority, both houses of Congress, and everybody's saying, the Democrats will never lose again, and on it's gone. This is, Trump's second non-consecutive term. So none of this is set in concrete. It depends on the vision and the courage of the people that will be in this administration, whether they'll pursue these policies or whether, if they fail, we'll drift back to the left and more of those failures. We're going to see. I'm in journalism. I'm not in the politics and the parties and politicians business. I'm in the Jewish
Right.
ideas business. So we're going to, wait and see and hope it works out. But we have to advocate and understand and try to, hold leaders' feet to the fire that this is where they should be thinking.
So you know who's been noticeably absent all this time? When's the last time you heard from Deborah Lipstadt?
Well, Deborah Lipstadt You're calling her up to the Torah by her Hebrew name, huh?
Yeah, right.
Deborah Lipstadt, has been for the last 4 years the State Department's, it has ambassadorial rank, special envoy on anti-Semitism. Now, that office has been really solely interested, as long as it's existed under both administrations for the last 20 years, on anti-Semitism abroad, not anti-Semitism at home. And indeed, it was impossible for her to speak out on this surge of American anti-Semitism because it would be attacking the party that put her in this very cushy position. She earned that position by engaging in really unscrupulous behavior for a person who had been a very scrupulous historian by approving of analogies that were floated by partisans that Trump is a Nazi, the Republicans, it's a return to the Weimar Republic if Trump's administration. This was intellectually bankrupt.
Right.
And she and Abe Foxman, the former head of the ADL, whose mainstream positions one longs for now, since his successor Jonathan Greenblatt has really trashed the ADL in many ways, although he raises a lot more money than Abe did.
Right.
They were competing for this job by being the most Democratic partisans. Our Office on Anti-Semitism in the U.S. government has done nothing about actual anti-Semitism. The strategy paper that was put forward by the Biden administration was a joke. It was toothless. It didn't get to the core of what was driving anti-Semitism, and it put Islamophobia, which is basically a fake concern, because most of what is called Islamophobia, and of course prejudice against Muslims exists just as prejudice against any group, but most of what is labeled Islamophobia is merely criticism of Muslim anti-Semitism, which
Right.
is endemic. And she has not been a voice on this issue. She's been, trying to counsel against anti-Semitism elsewhere, and not to any great success there either. If anything, I think, if I were to, offer advice to the Trump administration, not that he's asking my advice, although like many journalists, occasionally I have gotten notes from the former and soon to be president when he likes something I wrote. But the point is, I think we need to take the Office of about Anti-Semitism out of the State Department, where it's doing no good, and put it in the White House and get it behind the initiative to get to basically defund colleges that are engaging in anti-Semitism. There's no more important work to be done there. And that is something that the Democrats and their anti-Semitism envoy were completely disinterested in.
Jonathan, we've got a few minutes left. I want to get your opinion on this. So I'm a Republican, but when it comes to anti-Semitism in Israel, I don't I don't have a party loyalty. John Fetterman and Richie Torres to me are great guys, and Tom Massey, I hope they throw him where he belongs. But you have a group like CARE, for example, and their agenda is not Republican or Democrat, is getting their people into places of power. And we've seen them rise slowly and slowly, and their agenda is to get into power and to get their people into positions of power. And you had written about this in one of your columns about the Esther Project put out by the Heritage Foundation, and it highlights CARE's role and Hamas's role. Again, they're gonna bide their time. They're gonna get their people into every level of government until they've got control, and we can't move without them.
Well, I think you rightly referenced the Esther Project, which was actually a piece of the Project 2025 put forward by the Heritage Foundation,
Right.
which was demonized by Democrats as, authoritarian blueprint, which was nonsense. And part of it was their plans about anti-Semitism, which frankly, I hope the Trump administration will follow. And was partly what we've just been talking about defunding and deporting. CARE is an interesting case in that this is a group that has its origins in the 1990s, not all that long ago, only 30 years ago, as a political front group for Hamas fundraisers. It is now, it then reinvented itself as a so-called civil rights organization,
Right.
and got a lot of legitimacy, got a lot of partnerships with liberal Jewish groups. it has gained a certain degree of influence. It was even consulted by the Biden administration for its strategy paper on anti-Semitism, which was, basically insane since it cares about promoting anti-Semitism. Um, it is, as the Heritage Foundation has rightly labeled it, a part of an international Hamas support network. It is still doing that same work on which it was founded, which is supporting terrorism, promoting hatred against Jews, and doing so now, under the false flag of civil rights. They deserve no credence. They should not be treated by the media as anything but an extremist hate group, rather than being consulted about labeling
Right.
groups that call them out as hate groups. So that's a key thing. And again, we hope the Trump administration will do the right thing and treat it with the disdain, and call it out. And where it violates the law, let's see them prosecuted.
Right. Jonathan, I want to thank you so much for joining us. I want to wish you a happy Hanukkah and a new year, both Jewish and secular, filled with blessings and all good things. To sign up for your newsletter, jns.org.
Yes, go to jns.org. We have a twice daily newsletter which gives you all the news about Israel and the Jewish world, American politics, without the left-wing bias, without the anti-Israel bias. Just go there. It's a free newsletter you get twice a day. You can also go not only to read our material and our columns, my daily columns, but also go to YouTube, to JNS TV, our whole array of podcasts, including my two, but others as well, some great ones. There's a lot to offer. And if you're interested in Israel, if you're interested in the Jewish people, in the battle for Jewish rights, there's no better source of information for you.
Listen, I post your material all the time, and I put your name in there that I don't want to tag you because then you'll get bombarded. But I tell all my friends, followers, that Jonathan Tobin is the only source to go to for all these issues. And again, God bless you, and we thank you so much for everything you do for us, and continued good blessings to you and your family.
Thank you. And thanks for having me on. And see all of your viewers at jns.org.
Thank you.